Hey everyone, you are listening to the Self-Awareness Journey podcast. This little banter is about a car ride long and features your hosts, JJ Parker and Melissa Albers. JJ owns a tech company and Melissa has been a coach working with influencers for the last 18 years. So JJ, normally you are the best storyteller and you always kick us off on our pods. But I've been noticing something that the last couple of weeks that I wanted to share with you and ask you your opinion about, and that is, have you ever noticed how past relationships interfere or inform or change our current relationships? The reason I'm asking is
good question.
Yeah, the reason I'm asking is because I have had many conversations in the last couple of weeks where people are sort of reflecting, and they may not even have the awareness that they are, but reflecting about how a certain relationship, and it could be a boss relationship or a peer relationship or a spouse or a dating, anything, but how a past relationship has wounded or hurt someone. And when they're looking at their lives today and they're looking to perhaps replace that role, I won't say replace the relationship, but replace that role, sometimes there's a lot of fear entering into a new relationship or concern for replicating something that happened in a past relationship. But it got me thinking, my goodness, there's so much of that in us. You know, we're so impacted by who we have been in rapport with, who we've spent our time with, who we've exchanged energy with. And when we leave a relationship, how often do we feel good about it? Not very. I don't think very often, even if it's well intended in its time. It feels like there's a lot of energy around that, like past relationships.
That makes me think of like a whole lot of different things.
I know. Well, like I said, usually our stories just flow and we go from there. But, you know, whenever Melissa starts something, it's always going to be a little windy road. But like
we call that wandering around in the woods.
Yes, exactly. But like,
well, so this, I mean, first, like what you said was like, we're social creatures, right?
Yeah.
We seek like relationships with people and interactions with people, and our past relationships certainly affect our current or new relationships, right? Because we don't want to get hurt again, or like maybe we like or dislike certain things from past relationships. We try to apply that to the current situation.
Yeah.
Right. Kind of like being creatures of habit a little bit.
Right. But what I think is yes, exactly right. Thank you for summarizing my meanderings. But you know what I was just thinking about though, is when we're not aware of the fact that that's what we're doing, we enter into something new with, rather than joy and openness, a lot of times we enter into a new relationship with anxiety about not wanting to have it be the other way.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just thinking about the idea that we talk a lot about how, you know, we kind of like analyze our own thoughts, right?
Yeah.
And we try to like be a little bit like internal, and how's our body feeling, and
yeah, exactly.
And awareness of like our surroundings and things. But it's the same thing. It's the same self-awareness thing, but it's applying it specifically to relationships with people and interactions with people.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Yep, exactly.
And I feel like sometimes when you're in a relationship, because it's not like well, let's say triggers are easy. Like I get triggered, right? It's a sort of an emotional burst. It's pretty easy to identify.
Yeah.
Things in relationships, I feel like, are spread out over long periods of time, and they're less they're
Noticeable.
harder to notice.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I totally agree.
Right. So I think
Yeah.
there's part of what you're saying is a little bit nuanced in the way that, like, sometimes it's hard to notice
Yeah.
if you're applying some past experience to your current experience.
Exactly. And you're the one who's making yourself miserable, not the new relationship. Like I
Mm-hmm.
really think that happens a lot. And it could be like not even a personal relationship. It could be something at work. I had a conversation with a great client this week in which they had a huge fear that their boss wasn't going to notice them.
Mm.
Like I'm doing all these things, and the last boss I had would never give me opportunities, and I want to be challenged, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm worried that this new boss is going to do the same thing, and so I have been kind of like avoiding saying anything, and I just feel like I have to work harder to show that I have all these things. And so if you think about that conversation, it's such a one-sided thinking pattern, you know. Here this person was, and he was feeling very threatened almost by this new person that is his new boss. He didn't even actually know the new boss or what was going to happen with the
Mm-hmm.
new boss. He didn't know at all if the boss was going to be a great supporter of people or a challenger, but he was so sure already that his reality that he had just experienced with someone else was going to carry over into this relationship, and
Yeah.
whereby it ends up manifesting a lot of that because you have the energy and you're behaving in a way that that's already the case.
Yeah, it creates, that's, we always say that you're creating your own reality.
Yeah.
And that's a great example about how
Mm-hmm.
you can actually inadvertently create
Mm-hmm.
that same situation.
I actually think it happens a lot more than we realize. And it could be very subtle. It doesn't have to be this major life altering relationship or this major
Mm-hmm.
life altering experience, but it's these little emotions, it's these little trailers, I think, that get stuck in our systems that we don't notice, that just continually cause a little electrical shock. It's like
Mm.
that little shock kicks off in multiple times of our experience because we're unaware that our feelings are threatened or scared or fearful, and our thinking patterns are jumping right in saying, well, let's compare this to what happened before, and you're going to have that happen again.
Yeah. So the idea that we do this all the time. It's like we apply past things to current things, even though the
Yes.
new situation is not the same. I mean, we've talked about that in lots of different ways.
Yeah, I know. I know.
But that's just sort of human nature, right? We're trying to like learn from our past and apply it to the current situation.
Yeah.
Even if a lot of times, even if it doesn't actually apply or
Right.
isn't really the same.
Right. Right. And I think this is at the root of where a lot of people get stuck. They might get stuck in professional development. They might get stuck in a personal relationship, not reaching the level of intimacy or closeness that they
Mm-hmm.
want to. Um, not reaching a level of communication that they want to,
Yeah.
because they have these little, and that's what it feels like to me. It's like these little wires that stick up from something before that we didn't really process and put away properly or put in the right spot, and it just keeps firing, and these little things come up that kind of remind us of something from what has happened before, and we instantly start telling ourselves a story.
Mm-hmm.
It's like wrapping so much cotton around the rock, that we soon forget that there actually was a rock. There's just this really big fluffy thing in a corner that we kind of forgot what it was, and we don't really like it, but we just avoid it because it's not hurting anything really. We think
So,
that.
um, so how can you like know that you're applying some like past assumptions to your current situation?
Well,
I
I think again, like I'd be interested in what you think about this, JJ. But I think like when we're talking about these things, we have to go with what our feelings are first and foremost. When something fires off in us, regardless of if it's a discussion we're having in our workplace, whether we're having it at home or with a friend, a discussion will happen, and something in that conversation or something in that experience will trigger a feeling that is uncomfortable in us.
mm-hmm.
And we may know what that feeling is, and we may not know what that feeling is. But we have to pay attention to it. We can't ignore it, because ultimately, whatever we resist persists.
Mm-hmm.
So if we continually resist this feeling that happens every time we get to this part of the conversation, or every time this topic comes up, or every time this experience starts to show itself, and we have this same little blip, even if it's with completely different people, we are having the same experience as we had before. So noticing what the feeling is, like, that's the very first thing. And we always talk about that, but this is yet another example.
Yep. I'll go the opposite of that.
What?
Well, a lot of times I have to remind myself, like in my head, that this situation is not the same as the past situation, right? These people are not the same as the other people, right?
Do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you remember to do that?
Well, because I just know, maybe, and this is probably the root of it is exactly what you're saying, but I know it because, like, when I get that uncomfortable feeling, like, I'm like, oh, that's that uncomfortable feeling. It's because of this old stuff, right? It's because of this old trauma, right? From my past.
Trauma. We should get t-shirts made. That's another good one.
And it doesn't apply today. Like, this is not, like, that was 15 years ago. It's different. Like, my whole life is different today. Like, you know, and that stuff does not apply, right? So I just try to make sure that I remind myself that, you know, like, and especially, like, I mean, for you and I, right, as business partners, right? Like, my biggest trauma was business partner related.
Yes, yeah.
And, like, I'll often need to remind myself that, like, the things that were happening back then are not they're not happening now. Well, I get those feelings sometimes. This is so different,
right?
That I don't need to, like, I need to stop myself from, you know, sort of acting on some of those, like, past, you know, like, insecurities and trust issues and things like that.
And we've both talked a lot about that, because I too have had a lot of that history of partners that were not great partnerships for whatever reason. But I think, you know, the other thing I think for consideration is reflection is important, but only to a point, which is where you're talking about now. I think the whole therapy and coaching, like therapy and that sort of thing, the traditional therapy model is, let's reflect. Let's keep going back. And I actually don't think that serves us. I think it serves us to a point. So I know it's not an unpopular opinion to say that. But I think that the reflection piece is super important for us to understand what part of it had to do with us. When something doesn't go right in a previous relationship, what part of it had to do with us? We have to own that piece. And I think what happens a lot of times is we get to that reflection piece and then we go, well, they were this and they were that, and this didn't work because of them. And it wasn't me. And while a lot of it may not have been you, there is part of it that is, right? So I think that part in reflecting and saying what part of this really has to do with me is super important, because it allows us to process that part, process those feelings and release them. And we all do things either unaware or more inexperienced or more immature as we're developing. We don't know, we just don't know. And it doesn't mean that I think that any new relationship or any new partnership or anything can be informed by what doesn't work, but it doesn't have to impact your current realities.
For me, I was just thinking, like, definitely, like, some of my past off, like, it was me, right? Like, I mean, half of it was me.
Yeah. Well, and both of us have done a lot of work.
And these are like,
right?
And I'm going to like preface this with like, these are like, I don't know, adult, like adult relationships, right? Like we're not really talking about like childhood, where the relationship is extremely imbalanced, right? Where you have a child parent with relationship trauma. We can even maybe touch on that in a minute, but like,
Yeah.
but like, in more mature adult relationships, you do have to take responsibility for your half of it. It's way easy to blame, right?
Oh, I know. Yeah.
Really
and it feels
easy.
good to do that at the time. It feels good
Yeah,
to
but
blame that person
at
at
some
the time.
point, it's like, yeah, there was also stuff I could have done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
and like you said, learning from that and moving on from it and applying it.
Yeah.
Applying the things you learned to your new relationships and just like letting go of the stuff that
No
doesn't
longer serves you.
apply. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But I mean, it could even be something as simple as if you're dating, for example, and if you are with a partner in the past that didn't treat you well or that thought of you as a certain way, you're too this, you're too that. You're too heavy, you're too loud, you're too much of a partier, you're too quiet. And they constantly tell you that over and over again, and it's somebody that you really care about, that can leave a big divot, right? And even in that situation where it would be easy to say, well, that person was an abuser, maybe not overly, but even to a point. And yet there is still responsibility on your part because you allowed it. So this isn't to make yourself feel bad or to feel judged. It's to simply own what part is yours, because the next relationship that you then enter into, by owning what part you had to do with the last one, the next time, if anything even comes up around that, it's like, no,
Yeah.
that
nope,
isn't.
This one is not for me.
No,
Yep.
nope. Or informing the other person, nope, we're not doing that. This is what I need in my relationship so that I can continue to be in partnership with you. So I just think it's really interesting because I think normally what will happen is we'll stuff all of that away and we feel shame. So like in the example I just gave, somebody might feel a lot of guilt or shame that their partner told them that they were to this, enough to that you actually believe it. And then there's shame and guilt. So the last thing you want to do is bring that to the surface and say, I had something to do with that. Like there's just already too much of that negative flow of energy in the wrong direction from what you want. So naturally what we do is try to pretend like we don't actually feel that way. We don't actually have that experience. That actually didn't happen. Or if it did, it was just everything about it was terrible and I don't want to even consider it. And we end up somehow perhaps even slightly replicating it again, or we have so much guilt and shame that we add to this bucket of ours that makes us not feel whole or not makes us not feel capable of having a completely healthy experience with the next person.
Yeah, relationships are complicated.
That's true.
You're talking about things like self-confidence and advocating for yourself, because in the situation you just described, like it's very easy to not stand up for yourself, right?
Yeah.
And say, hey, no, that crossed the line.
Yeah.
We're not going to be in a relationship like that.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to like lose somebody, or you want them to still be in your life, or like there's a million different reasons, right, that you put up with that.
Yeah.
And so learning to really advocate for yourself and have the confidence to do so is hard.
Yeah. And I think you asked the question, like, how can we, having a little more awareness about this? I would say the other thing that I didn't think about saying, but I think it's really important, is that the more we try to be validated by other people, which we say often in the pod and in a lot of our lessons, the more we seek validation from other people, we'll never actually have it. So it comes into play so strongly here when you're looking at past relationships, because you are seeking to be whole. You're seeking to be complete by the relationships that you are in. And the truth is that you are already complete. So if you take on too much water, you
Mhm.
know, from the other ship, thinking that it's going to make you better, it actually just creates a big wobble.
Mm.
You know, it just creates a big wobble. So I think really understanding that you are whole and learning all the time, and it's okay for you to have some of these experiences. The most important thing is that you can learn from them, and it doesn't mean you're going to replicate those. You
Mhm.
know, you talked about a parent-child dynamic,
Yeah.
which is hugely, vastly impactful, right?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that the thing I notice most with people is how their childhood experiences are still very deeply ingrained in the way they behave and how that
100%.
shapes their relationships.
100%. Yeah, I think that's very, very true. I've shared in our pod before that I had a pretty tumultuous upbringing, and my biggest fear, to be honest with you, my biggest fear when I was growing up and in my 20s and 30s was that I was going to end up being exactly like my mother. I really was
Mm.
so scared of doing that. My mom is a wonderful person. However, my mom is extremely opposite of me in a multitude of ways. And the stuff that I didn't like about her, I was so sure I would become.
Hmm.
And which made no sense. It made no sense
Yeah.
logically, but my conditioning and the relation that I had with her for that all my upbringing, that was a fear for me. So I really had
Hmm.
to overcome and learn, just because somebody is even someone as informative as your mother, you can still learn good things. You can still own parts of the relationship that you're not proud of.
Mhm.
You know, like there's a lot that I have to do with in my mom's relationship with me that wasn't great. And I own that now, and I feel really good about it, actually. It sounds crazy to say that, but I feel really good about the relationship that I have with my mom now, because boy, oh boy, it sure wouldn't have looked like it would be like that now if you would have looked back
Yeah.
even 15 years, 10 years.
Yeah. Hmm.
So I think it's really important to be able to look at your relationships with clean eyes. And if something, you know, if you're looking at a past relationship and there feels anything having to do with discomfort or dislike, or something doesn't feel good, what I really think that's telling you is there's still something in there that you need to release. And it might very well be, what part of this has to do with me?
Mhm. It
So
probably is that.
it probably is that.
Well, I mean, I kind of joking, but
Yeah.
it is, that's kind of, to me, it's like the last and hardest step of that
Yes.
is to understand what role you played,
Yeah.
because you don't want to blame. I mean, no one really wants to like blame themselves.
No, right. Yeah. You know what's funny is you
And
said
sometimes it's hard to see that. It's
Mhm.
hard to see that your own actions caused um, certain things.
I agree. And I think you said the last and hardest step. And I think the reason it's the hardest is because we just don't think about it. We don't even realize that that's a component that should be considered.
Yeah.
We don't think, like, in past relationships, there's so many. I mean, haven't you talked with people that talk about ex-boyfriends or ex-girlfriends, and it's a whole litany of what was wrong with that other person?
And it's always, it's like you phrase it in a, like, this happened to me,
Yes, not
right?
with me.
Right.
Yes, that
So
teeny little word. Yeah, so I don't think it's actually hard. Like, the thing is this, is that we think it's going to be really, really hard to face that. It isn't
mhm.
hard. Actually, it's so freeing. It's a wonderful thing to say, what part of this has to do with me, honestly? It is
Mhm.
such a freeing thing. But I think the reason it's hard is because we just don't think to do it. That's the hard part. We think, oh, wait a minute. I never thought about that. Why? Well, that's a strange, that doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So I was thinking, the other thing I was thinking about was, we've been kind of talking about like past relationships, well, I guess like the parent-child one doesn't apply, but we've been talking to very much like about past relationships that like are no longer like we're not in relation with these people anymore, right?
Oh,
Like
yep.
past relationships, like like I had a
One and
partner, I
dones.
had a boyfriend, I had a whatever, and now I don't.
Yeah. One
right?
and dones. Yeah.
So obviously, like we're taking those experiences and informing and kind of like applying them to new relationships, but there's like relationships, like our spousal relationships, right? Like that are very long running.
Yeah.
Right. And
Well, hopefully.
hopefully so far.
So far, so good.
But even there, like, like we're not perfect through our whole relationships. And, like I was in my 20s when I got married. Like I was very different then than I am now.
Yeah.
And so, with people growing, changing, learning through a very long relationship, some things that would happen maybe in an earlier in that relationship.
Yeah, good call.
Could affect you, but they don't maybe even apply now because both of you are much more mature. You're at a whole different life stage. Like,
yes, that makes a
whatever,
huge
kids are
impact,
different, jobs are different, houses are different. Like,
yeah.
So I think that's interesting
so
too. Like, I think that's a interesting conversation to even have with your partner, as to think about like how things have changed over 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, that's a super interesting conversation. And I agree with you because Mitch and I were actually last week just talking about that. I don't remember what happened, that something happened. And Mitch just said, boy, don't you just remember like when we were younger, how we would have thought about this really different. And it was like, oh yes, for sure. Like I know I had a very hot switch. So like anything could set me off when I was younger. And I was a good door slammer. Like the littlest provocation, I'd be slamming the door. And we lived in a house with cheap foam core doors, so that wasn't very satisfying. But I always felt that explosive, like I'm so mad, right? And now I find that absolutely laughable. I don't remember the last time I got so mad that I would want to slam a door.
But I bet you if some situation comes up, Mitch is like, oh, here comes a door slamming.
Yeah. Well, actually, I can tell you this because my husband is the most calm. He's very like you. He's very calm, very laid back. And I would be like so mad and I'd go and slam the door. And then I'd hear his voice on the other side of the door. Oh, now we're going to slam the door. And one time he tried to get out ahead of it and he tried to slam the door first. And I burst out laughing in the middle of a fight because it was so ridiculous. And I never did it again.
Yeah,
I never
got
did it again. So yeah, I think that's true. We're constantly evolving humans. I guess that's the key here is we just have to allow when we do something or we've had an experience that we aren't proud of or that we do actually have some ownership in, it's absolutely okay to say what part of this had to do with me.
Yeah, and I would say it takes courage to be honest about that stuff, right? Like to say, hey, this part, bothers me now or bothered me in the past. And like, I just want to let you know that. And like, I don't think that applies today. And I'm going to work really hard on not reacting in the way I used to react.
Yeah.
Right. But being able to being able to get to a point where like you recognize that in yourself, you would like, you're kind of like your story, like you admit you do it, right? And you understand it doesn't apply today and you're honest, you can communicate that. That's all. Yeah. It's easy to say that here on the podcast, but it's actually hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly think for anybody that's in that struggle and this conversation has brought any of that up, like where it's like, well, I do actually have some stuff that I need to own. Get out a book or sit with yourself and just say, what part of this had to do with me? And just wait for a minute. And the answers will come. The answers will come. And when they do, it's okay to say, I ask that this be released now. I forgive myself. I forgive myself for that part. And I ask to be released from this now. And from there, everything is easier.
Yeah. We should do a whole episode on self-forgiveness. I think other people forgive us a lot easier than we forgive ourselves.
Yeah, that's great. We hope that you've enjoyed today's episode. Our mission is to help people become happier and more effective by gaining insight into their own thoughts and feelings. We'd love your support. First, share this podcast with anyone you think might enjoy it. Second, leave us a rating or review on your favorite podcast site. This helps others discover the podcast so we can reach more people. And third, sign up for our newsletter at theselfawarenessjourney.com. This will help us communicate better with you and build our community. Thank you so much for joining us in the Self-Awareness Journey. We'll see you next week.